Okay, everybody, welcome back. David Ansardi here. I'm going to, all right, here we go. I am going to do your next video clip, which is going to primarily be about non-steroid type hormones. And then I'm going to do a separate clip on the function of steroid type hormones. So what am I talking about here? Steroid versus non-steroid type hormones. Well, let's talk about steroid hormones first, because we've all heard of steroids before. Steroid hormones are chemical messengers produced by endocrine glands that are hydrophobic and derived from cholesterol. So they don't like the watery-based fluids of your intracellular and intracellular spaces. They are fat-loving type molecules. Here's what cholesterol looks like. It's a chemical structure mainly made of carbons and hydrogens that are linked together to form these little ring-shaped structures. That's cholesterol. And any type of molecule that has lots of carbons and hydrogens in it, that's a hydrocarbon, those tend to be hydrophobic. They love fats. So that's cholesterol. And then your steroid type hormones are derived from these very important molecules. So there are some additional atoms that are added to cholesterol to make different types of hormones. Your steroid hormones include things like estrogen and testosterone. Testosterone, your male sex hormone, can trigger muscle growth, which is why bodybuilders take steroids to promote muscle growth and fat loss as well. Another type of steroid hormone, cortisol, which is produced by your adrenal glands during periods of stress and causes many different effects on various parts of the body. So those are your steroid hormones, and I want you to keep in mind that they are hydrophobic, because that winds up being key to how they cause their effects on their target locations in your body. Now, for the bulk of this particular video lecture, though, we're going to talk about non-steroid type hormones or amino acid based hormones. These are hormones that are built from or derived from amino acids. Hopefully you guys remember, yeah, of course you do, that amino acids are the monomers or the building blocks for proteins or peptides. A peptide is a short chain of amino acids. Proteins are longer chains of amino acids that fold up into complex three-dimensional structures. That tertiary structure, hopefully you heard a little bit about in Biology 201. So all of these hormones are derived from amino acids. Now, some of them may just be derived from a single little amino acid, and it gets modified in some way to make a hormone. A good example of that are your thyroid hormones. They're not peptides, they're not proteins, they're derived from single amino acids. Then you have other hormones that are peptides, little short chains of amino acids, and then many are these proteins that are longer chains and have complex three-dimensional shapes. Like you see down here, this is actually the three-dimensional shape of a single molecule of insulin, the hormone that is so critical for our glucose homeostasis, and which you'll be learning about in quite a bit more detail later in this particular unit. Almost all of your non-steroid hormones are hydrophilic molecules. I'm going to erase some of this scribbly scratch here. Hydrophilic versus hydrophobic over here for your steroid hormones. That's important to keep in mind. There is an exception, though. Your thyroid hormones, even though they're derived from amino acids, they're derived from a hydrophobic type of amino acid, and so therefore they are also hydrophobic, which means the way they exert their effects or cause effects on their targets is more like how the steroid hormones function. So keep that in mind as we go through these two video clips. Let's just talk about how hormones function in general. Keep this in mind throughout the unit, and for every endocrine hormone that you study, you need to, or you learn about, you need to know these basic things about its function, how it's produced, where it goes, and what the actions are that it causes, the effects that it causes on its target. So hormones are produced in responses to some type of stimulus. For example, insulin is produced by your pancreas when your blood glucose levels go up to higher levels. That's the stimulus or the trigger that causes that hormone to be produced. So the stimulus causes the endocrine gland to secrete the hormone. So in the case of insulin, the pancreas, you have certain cells in your pancreas called beta cells that produce insulin. The hormone then is transported throughout the body. It gets into your bloodstream, and then it exits the bloodstream from capillaries into tissues all over your body. Remember your body fluid back and forth from blood to interstitial fluids. And what that hormone will do, yes, it's traveling throughout your whole body, but that doesn't mean that the hormone acts on every single cell in your body. A hormone will act on a particular type of cell in your body if that cell has a specific receptor for the hormone. Okay, a receptor that binds the hormone with a lock and key type fit, that's required in order for that hormone to have an effect on a particular cell in the body. And if that happens, that cell is considered to be a target of that hormone. Now, that binding is not the end of the story, though. Remember, the endocrine system is involved in controlling bodily processes, so we've got to have some kind of a change, a response in that target cell that causes something else to occur, something new to occur. So in the case of insulin, insulin is secreted by cells in the pancreas, gets into the bloodstream, it binds on target cells in other parts of the body, which include cells of the skeletal muscle, liver, adipose tissue. And then those cells respond by taking up glucose from the bloodstream, okay, and lowering your blood glucose levels. And you're going to hear more about that story later, but that's just kind of putting what I just talked about into some kind of context. Okay, so let's see how does this happen when a hormone binds to a target cell? How does that lead to, in a general way, how does that lead to an effect within that cell? So we're going to be zooming in down to the cellular level, which gets to be a little abstract at times. And don't stress out about it too much. We're not going to get into a lot of gory details. Non-steroid hormone actions, and I really almost thought about calling this hydrophilic hormone actions, because it's really more about whether a hormone is hydrophilic or hydrophobic versus non-steroid or steroid. But these hormones do get classified in different ways. Okay, so as we already talked about, your non-steroid hormones, or almost all of them, are hydrophilic. They're amino acid based, and most are peptides and proteins, and those are hydrophilic type molecules. So guess what? What does that mean? Here's a little chunk of a cell membrane that you guys have seen, of course, many times before. If you have a hormone that has been secreted by an endocrine gland, and it is a hydrophilic non-steroid hormone, and it's out here in the extracellular fluids, it cannot make it across the cytoplasmic membrane of a target cell. It can't diffuse through that phospholipid bilayer, can't get through all these fatty acid tails here of the membrane. So what that means is these types of hormones in order to start to have an effect on a target cell, they have to bind to a cell surface receptor. Okay, so these cell surface receptors are membrane proteins. And individual cells may have thousands and thousands of copies of different types of receptors for different types of molecules floating there all through their cell membranes. Not all cells have the same receptors. Okay, so for a particular hormone, that cell will only bind the hormone if it has the particular receptors for it. So for example, if this is insulin right here, this little red molecule here, insulin is only going to bind to the surfaces of cells that have insulin receptors in their membranes. Cells that don't have insulin receptors will not bind insulin, and insulin will have absolutely no effect, at least directly, on those types of cells. So once a hormone binds to its, once a hydrophilic non-steroid type hormone binds to its cell surface receptor, that is the first step in a series of events that causes that cell to respond. And so let's take a look at how that actually happens. And this is a diagram from your textbook, and there is quite a bit of complicated language here. I'm going to kind of walk us through this. You don't need to learn the nitty-gritty details of what this diagram is showing, but you do need to walk away with the bigger picture that I'll discuss here at the end. So let's see what's going on here. So here we have the cytoplasmic membrane of a target cell for a particular hormone. So here the hormone, here are these little pink spheres, and this is a target cell, so it has the specific receptor for that hormone. So the hormone binds to the receptor. They fit together, lock and key type fit. Once that happens, okay, the hormone doesn't get across. It can't go inside the cell and do anything. So here's how it actually can trigger an effect. What happens in the case for many hormones is once the hormone binds its receptor, there are other proteins along the inside there of the cytoplasmic membrane that are called G proteins. And again, don't worry about the nitty-gritty details here. But when the hormone binds to its cell surface receptor, the receptor changes shape, which now allows it to bind to a G protein that's also sitting there in the membrane. They don't come together, they can't bind together unless first the hormone binds to its receptor. The next thing that happens, this G protein here binds a GTP molecule. GTP is like ATP. It's an RNA nucleotide, but it has, instead of an A or an adenine base, it has a G or a guanine base. Okay, the G protein will not bind to GTP unless it has first bound to the receptor molecule that has bound the hormone. So what we're seeing here is there's a step-by-step process. One step leads to another, and you've seen these types of things before in physiology, such as when you learned about how your muscle fibers contract. So it's a step-by-step sequence. One thing leads to another, and none of the subsequent steps happen unless the very first trigger occurs at the beginning. So once GTP is bound to this G protein, these proteins can slide along the membrane, and it is now capable of binding to an enzyme called adenylate cyclase. So this is enzymes. Almost all enzymes are proteins. This is sitting there in the membranes of your cells. It's not active. It's not doing anything though until a G protein bound to GTP binds it. Those two come together. Now this enzyme is active. And what it does is it takes ATP molecules and converts them to another type of molecule called cAMP. That stands for cyclic AMP, adenosine monophosphate. So it just changes the structure of ATP, rearranges some things, gets rid of a couple of phosphates. You don't have to worry about those details. And now these cyclic AMP molecules are going to lead to additional effects inside the cell. Okay, so let's take a look at what happened. Hormone bound to the receptor on the cell surface. We went through a series of steps, and we ended up with cyclic AMP molecules on the inside of the cell that were not there before. These cyclic AMP molecules are an example of what's called a second messenger. Okay, so they're going to continue to carry this message or this signal of the endocrine hormone into the inside of the cell. The hormone itself could not get across the plasma membrane. So it needs to trigger the generation of this, what we call a second messenger, that's going to now cause responses inside the target cell. So it's transmitting that message from the hormone. And what they're showing you here on the diagram is when cyclic AMP is produced, it now triggers inactive enzymes, so enzymes that are floated, called kinases, that are floating around in the cytoplasms of your cells in an inactive state, kind of like those blood clotting factors that float around in your bloodstream in an inactive state. They now become activated. They become active enzymes. Enzymes are chemical workhorses of your cells that can lead to all types of responses. So depending on the hormone and depending on the second messenger, depending on the target cell, this can lead to activation of other enzymes. It can cause the cells to start secreting something that they weren't secreting before. It can cause ion channels to open. It can cause cells to divide, etc. So, and then we're just looking at this in kind of a generic way right now for how these types of hormones cause effects on their target cells. There's a whole lot of variety in what those actual responses are. Another key feature of non-steroid hormone actions is you have tremendous amplification that occurs. So you can have just a little bit of hormone here binding to maybe just a few receptors on the surface of that target cell. But what happens is whenever that happens, that's going to lead to activation of these enzymes. These enzymes can be reused over and over and over again. So one single enzyme is going to make a whole bunch of the second messenger, whatever that may be. And then these guys can each activate a whole bunch of these other enzymes that are going to lead to the responses in the target cell. So you have amplification from a little bit of hormone to a whole bunch of these activated enzymes that are going to cause changes in our target. So keep that in mind as well. A little bit of hormone can lead to a dramatic response because of that. So again, don't get too freaked out over the details, but do understand that a hormone binding to the cell surface leads to a cascade of events, triggers the formation, the production of these second messengers that continue to carry the signal inside the cell, and those are the little guys who ultimately lead to these big responses that the target cells can make. Cyclic AMP, cAMP, is not the only type of second messenger. Calcium ions can be second messengers with other types of hormones and receptors. And then you have some types of fatty acids as well that can function as second messengers. And you may read about those as you're going through this particular chapter in your textbook. All right. My slide is slowing down here. I believe that is the last slide, though, for this particular lecture. The next one will be on steroid hormone action. So I will see you back for that one.